Welcome to Adjusted Reality, a podcast series trusted by the adjusted and brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, where we learn from athletes, celebrities, influencers, and healthcare professionals about how to optimize health in a fun, relatable way. Join me, Dr. Sherry McAllister, as I speak with journalist, author, and storyteller Sam Quinones. Sam is a Los Angeles-based freelance journalist, a reporter for 35 years, and an author of 4 highly acclaimed books of narrative nonfiction. He is a veteran reporter on immigration, gangs, drug trafficking, and the border. He is formerly a reporter with the LA Times, where he worked for 10 years. Before that, he made a living as a freelance writer, residing in Mexico for over a decade. His latest book, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. The Least of Us follows his landmark book, Dreamland, the true tale of America's opioid epidemic, which ignited awareness of the epidemic that has cost the United States hundreds of thousands of lives and has become the deadliest drug scourge in the nation's history. I can't be more grateful to have you with us, Sam, today, because it is absolutely one of those moments where it adjusted my reality. And few have actually adjusted my reality as much as your latest 2 books. Now, I often recommend books, but no, I'm not recommending his 2 books. This is mandatory reading. If you're a healthcare provider, if you're a father or a mother, if you're a grandparent, if you're a teacher, these 2 books are mandatory for you to read because your eyes will be opened. Your heart will hurt a little bit, but the most important thing is you'll be able to take action today. And that's what this is really all about, is taking action to make a better adjusted reality for all of us. So Sam, welcome to Adjusted Reality.
Thank you very much, Sherry. It's great to be with you. Very nice of you.
I tell you this, you are brave, you are bold, and you are tenacious. When you wrote the first book, Dreamland, I have to say, it was a very scary moment for you because I look back at those times in 2015. There wasn't a lot of people who even knew we had an epidemic. And more importantly, they didn't know there was mastermind opportunity happening at the biggest and most influential and wealthiest levels. Did you have some fear as you started to break into actually looking at who's behind some of the lies that were told?
You know, I can't say that I had much fear of that. What I did encounter, though, was very unsettling, was that when I was writing the book Dreamland, which is all, again, about the opioid epidemic, prescription narcotics being prescribed by doctors, and then some of those people getting addicted and some of those folks switching to heroin, et cetera. What I did find that was very ominous, I found, was that there was nobody or very few people who had addicted loved ones wanted to talk about it then. There was really a nationwide silence. And I told my wife, I said, no one's going to read this book because I'm finding nobody out there wants to talk. Everyone was mortified. Everyone was ashamed. The obituaries rarely told the truth about how someone died. Back then, there were only 3 lawsuits against drug companies. The remarkable thing then, though, was that after Dreamland came out in 2015, much to our astonishment, in this house, the awareness of everything just began to explode. People, largely though, because people who had been holding within and hiding the fact that their uncle or their daughter or their husband or wife were addicted to opioids in one form or another, maybe now heroin, began to see that they were not alone as they had assumed. The nationwide silence made everybody think I'm the only one in 10 miles that has this problem. And it turns out 3 or 4 people on your block have it, And so as time went on, I began to see this very vividly because I lived it. I lived it both in the silence and then the gradual awakening, people coming out of the shadows into the light, and that creating a political momentum. And so politicians began to take notice of it. Attorneys general began to take notice of it. You began to see all these new lawsuits, eventually 3,000 lawsuits against drug companies and so on, by counties, towns, tribes, et cetera, attorneys general, et cetera. It was just a remarkable transformation. But I can tell you, when I was writing the book, I despaired of anything ever happening because these companies were so powerful, had so much money, and no one at the local level, very few people seemed eager to get out there and be public with this.
I'm so grateful that you actually stuck with it, because you could have easily just said, you know what, it's a David Goliath story. These are massive revenue generating companies. There's no way that anybody's ever going to take them on. And I noticed that, the Sackler family, for those that are listening and may not have the history of where this all began, I want you to touch on that. But the Sackler family is the founder and owner of Purdue Pharma. And as of 5 hours ago, The Guardian finally came out, and Oxford University, as of today, as we're sitting here today, and I give you, Sam, a lot of credit for this. They finally said enough is enough. In fact, the article really does point out Oxford University cuts ties with the Sackler family over links with the opioids. It's so long in coming, and it's painful that it took them almost 8 years to figure out that having this name associated is not a stamp of reputable opportunity. Can you give our audience just a little bit in Dreamland, a little bit about what you saw at the very beginning, so we kind of walk them through your two books, which is really difficult to do because there's a lot in there.
I would say that the Sackler family's contribution to this whole problem was outsized. Largely because they understood what actually every street heroin dealer understands, which is that opioids are so powerful, exert such enormously powerful, physically dependent control on our brains, our brain chemistry, our reward pathways, that you get people using a little bit, and eventually you keep pushing the doctor particularly to prescribe, and that's mainly what their sales reps did, push the doctor to prescribe, and then eventually those patients will, in time, will be consumers of your product, OxyContin in the case of Purdue Pharma, owned, as you say, by the Sackler family. But they will also up the dosage, so it'll just be ever escalating tolerances and so on. And they understood that, and I think every street heroin dealer kind of has that basic instinctive understanding of the difference between these drugs and all the other drugs that they could be selling. The Sackler family also, I would say, in furtherance of that idea, was innovative, I guess you could say, and with a remarkable number of marketing approaches and promotional approaches towards doctors, relentless visits to doctors, constant visit to doctors, very hard sell visits to doctors, and paying their sales reps enormous bonuses, the highest bonuses ever registered in the pharmaceutical industry back in those years. We're talking mid-90s through, maybe the last few years. 8 or so years. This was all kind of promoting a narcotic, highly addictive narcotic, as if, one, it was not addictive because science, quote, now knew that there was, the pain patients couldn't be addicted to narcotics. That was nonsense. But also the idea that you could push it on these doctors, and the way to do it with relentless visits, constant little gifts, lunch constantly, trips to, Arizona or Florida or Hawaii for conventions and this kind of thing. And it was aggressive kind of marketing. Now, another drug might not have created this kind of problem, but this was a narcotic, an opioid derived from the opium poppy, and it's very addictive. And that is really kind of what set the stage. After that, all the other companies kind of mimicked the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma sales reps. And so you began to see that. And what's also interesting, I thought, which is what the information that I later came upon as this awareness began to grow, and as attorneys general began to get in the mix, and they began to file criminal complaints against the company and against the family, is you began to get a release of all these internal memos and emails and reports from the company itself. And it's very clear, if you read all of those in these criminal complaints, that the company and the family itself, really, it was the family, began behaving like addicts themselves, except for the addictive substance was not an opioid or heroin or oxycodone. It was money. And they just could not get enough. The year in 2010 is very interesting. The company, Purdue Pharma, would funnel regularly hundreds of millions of dollars to the family every year. They hit a pinnacle in 2010 with, I think it was $889 million that the family received from Purdue Pharma, due almost entirely from sales of OxyContin. And even in that year, round about that time, you still saw emails from the Sackler board directors wondering how they could boost sales, why we didn't make this sales goal. And I'm thinking, my God, it's like nothing is enough. And that's exactly the definition of an addict, of addiction. It's a nothing is enough. And to me, that was kind of the remarkable insight, I think, that I got from all these documents were being made public as this issue became front and center in America through like 2017, 18, 19, 20, and so on, is just how powerful the money from selling a narcotic was addictive to a family in every way that the narcotic itself was addicted to people on the street.
When you wrote Dreamland, and you were like right at the precipice, like you were right in the heart of the very beginning of people starting to recognize, especially when you go back in history and you think that they mandated the treatment of pain to the hospitals, and they looked at it as the fifth vital sign, making this like unconscionable. Yet we sent men and women into war. They never had this type of impact that we had seen going into this. There were times where you saw the heartland, and you saw the beauty of some of the things that made America so rich and so vital and so beautiful. And the book Dreamland, which you have to read because Sam takes you on a journey and you literally won't put it down. And sometimes, and I have to be honest with my audience, sometimes I had to put it down because my heart ached. It just ached. And Sam, I can only imagine writing it, how difficult this must have been, because some of the parents were just so caught off guard, like completely 100% shocked that someone that had tendinitis was now addicted to an opiate. Right. Going back, tell me a little bit about actually picking the title for the book Dreamland.
Yeah. Well, Dreamland grows from a town called Portsmouth, Ohio, which is on the Ohio River across from Kentucky, Southern Ohio. And I went to Portsmouth first in early 2013 because I knew that it was there that the business model known as the pill mill was essentially invented by one doctor who then went to prison. But the pill mill being essentially a pain clinic, but in name only. What it really is a scam in which doctors, take $250 cash from each patient and then prescribe them long lists of opioids, and then they go find a pharmacy that'll fulfill that prescription. But it became a business model for an important way for how opioid painkillers spread across the country. But it started. The doctor to first kind of master it and then train others was in Portsmouth, Ohio. So I went there to do that story. But as time went on, I began to realize, the story of Portsmouth, Ohio is a fascinating one. It's a classic Rust Belt And at the middle of the town, though, that for years and years, a great town of, industrial manufacturing, and it was working class town, but people were doing fairly well, and it felt around people who were doing fairly well. And the center of the town really was kind of the public square was a pool, an enormous swimming pool, and then a grounds around the swimming pool, and the pool is known as Dreamland. Gorgeous thing, and people remember it with a kind of fondness that breaks your heart. Then the Rust Belt phenomenon sets in, the jobs leave, Main Street hollows out, people leave, and in 1993, they dig up Dreamland, and it becomes a strip mall. And after that, the town is so vulnerable, and that within a couple of years, you get the arrival of opioids, and an entire generation, if not two, gets addicted and consumed and beaten, and a lot of people die, and a lot of people's lives are just simply stifled because of all this. I took that as an example of the larger point I was trying to make about this opioid epidemic, which is that it is rooted in our own destruction and shredding of community. So Dreamland Pool, this destruction of this place that was such a beautiful center of community connection, and people would grow up essentially at the pool, certainly spend most of their summers there. Everyone remembered it as just being a beautiful place to be and all this kind of thing. You destroy that, and all of a sudden, as we've done in many, many ways across this country to destroy community in ways that have nothing to do with swimming pools necessarily, but I took that as kind of like a parable for what we had done to community that made us as a country vulnerable, opened us to attack by this kind of locust arrival of pain pills and so on. So Portsmouth was important in that, but it was also important because both books, the Dreamland book and then dovetailing into The Least of Us, tell the story of a town that is not just lying back and saying, "Oh no, woe was us," but beginning in Dreamland and then well into the Least of Us, the last chapter in The Least of Us, is all about this town that's coming up off of the mat, being a place of recovery that got us into a town that got us into this whole problem in certain important ways. Now is becoming a place where people come to recover, to kick dope. And there's all kinds of fascinating things going on in Portsmouth about people coming together, finding each other after being isolated for so long with no place to meet. The swimming pool didn't exist anymore. The only place people saw each other was at Walmart. And so to me, the story of Portsmouth is an arc. It's going from, degradation, devastation, pill addiction, et cetera, to a new place where this is an American town kind of coming back. Not to say everything is perfect. There's still dope in that town, et cetera, et cetera. It's just that there's like a new story to be told there of a place of recovery, of solutions, of people coming out of what they've known for so long and finding each other and being out in public with each other. That's a big part of it as well. So the Dreamland story was really kind of my way of telling the story of the country and the shredding of community that got us into all this, but then also the idea that here was a town, along with some others we could talk about, where you could kind of see in the smallest ways possible, you see this movement forward, people not just lying back on the map saying, "Thing, we're done, what was us?"
Sam, you're very keyed in and very astute, because when I finished the book in Dreamland, I thought, what next? Now, I would have been devastated if I didn't have your second book. So I felt really good that I actually waited and I got both back to back, because you're right. The first book sets you up for the why. Why do we need to get this message out? Why is it important that everybody understands there is a problem and it's greater than ever? This has not gone away by any way, shape, or form. And why I brought Sam in today is because we have an issue that we need to talk about. We need to be real. We need to be raw. And we need to hold accountable those that have started the epidemic and those who continue the epidemic. And that was one piece, Sam. So I always felt very fortunate that I could get The Least of Us, because you said something so beautiful. It was one sentence out of the entire book of Dreamland, which I think is probably like 500 pages. And it said this: the solution to the opioid epidemic is community. And I stopped. Yeah. I stopped and I shut the book and I shut my eyes and I thought, what does that look like? And I didn't know what the next book, The Least of Us, was going to tell me. But I thought for a second, if there was one thing that you wrote, Sam, that was a moment of reflection for me and adjusted where I sat, was that one sentence. And now we have, early in 2015, being the president of the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, I was going here, there, and everywhere, much like you. It's like, I'll go anywhere where I can tell the truth that we have a pain problem, but it's not what you think it is. And that non-pharmacological approaches, drug-free approaches, can be a better solution than what the artificial intelligence told Stanford University as of last year, that 30% of people will get addicted on their first use of an opiate. I want you to reflect on that. Hundreds and thousands of people have become addicted because of dentistry procedures, because they're part of that 30%. And Sam, you were bold and brave enough to actually bring this message to them, but we're still here and we still need to talk about it. And that's why I want to move now into where we are today with The Least of Us. Now, this is a book that brings a squeeze on your heart. The stories you tell and how you tell them are so beautiful, and so needed and necessary. Because when you started Dreamland, you said no one wanted to talk. Now we get into, let's talk about it. And the shocking thing that I found when you started telling us about how we transitioned from opiates into some of the other now very, very scary chemicals that are coming out that are literally causing schizophrenia and the brain literally no longer being able to connect with reality.
Right.
Fentanyl and methamphetamine addictions. They're now a crisis, a public health crisis. But you saw it from the Mexican side because you told a story about how it all started in Mexico and how it started to change. Tell us a little bit about now going into The Least of Us.
Well, I mean, what happened was, as I began to see the awakening that began to happen with Dreamland, one of the barometers of that was I began to get lots of invitations to come speak, which also were stunning. I did not expect that. So 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, I just spoke and spoke and spoke all over the country. It was a remarkable thing. Along the way, I began to see that the story itself was changing as I went, because now the supply was no longer so much coming from doctors and pharmaceutical companies. The supply, the Mexican trafficking world said, we'll take it from here in a sense. And they began to provide just catastrophic quantities growing through those years of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Fentanyl, an opioid, both of them synthetic, meaning no plants involved, just chemicals. But fentanyl, an opioid, a depressant, and meth, a stimulant. And I began to realize that this was the new story, that the supply source had shifted. To me, this has always been about supply creating demand. Okay, it started with the doctors and the prescriptions and the pharmaceutical companies and their heavy promotion, covering the country for many years with these pain pills and creating an opioid addicted population that did not exist before. West Virginia, interesting, was always ranked near the very bottom of the 50 states in terms of addiction and overdose and all that kind of stuff until those pills were visited on the state. I'm sorry, and now it's number one. So it starts there, but then, of course, the Mexican trafficking world comes through, and I believe fentanyl and methamphetamine are all about scandalous, massive, unrelenting supplies of highly potent, that's the other thing, very, very potent drugs that are now creating demand. There's no demand for fentanyl. It just doesn't exist. And no heroin addict, even a heroin addict, does not want to be addicted to fentanyl, because a heroin addict has to use it twice, 3 times a day. Fentanyl, you have to use 6, 8 times a day to keep the withdrawal, the dope sickness away. People were moved from, say, pain pills to fentanyl, and some people who had no connection whatsoever with any of these drugs were made addicted because they simply got They bought a pill. They thought it was one thing, and it turned out to include fentanyl. So this is all about supply creating demand, and it's also, though, very importantly, about what benefits traffickers. Synthetic drugs are quote, a no-brainer, unquote, for the trafficking world. Means if you make your dope, instead of grow your dope, you don't need land, you don't need sunlight or irrigation or farmers or any of that stuff. You contract the supply chain dramatically, you lower your risk, you increase your profit, geometrically, essentially. And so it's all about what benefits traffickers. It has nothing really to do with what the consumer is demanding, so to speak. And this is true across the country, I think. And that is really where we find ourselves. We find ourselves in a situation in which that we have never seen. One source, which is essentially the Mexican trafficking world, mostly on the western coast of Pacific coast of Mexico, with enormous control of the shipping ports there, able to get the ingredients for all the drugs they want to make from China through those shipping ports, Mexico City Airport too, all that kind of thing. They're making quantities that just stagger, just unbelievable quantities of this stuff. And this has spread nationwide. We've never seen one source essentially cover, not even the Colombian drug cartels with their cocaine did this, cover the country in the way fentanyl is now everywhere. And not just one drug, but two, methamphetamine too. So we were seeing this, but of course, all of this trampolines off of the population of opioid addicted consumers that we created when we vastly and aggressively liberalized the prescribing of opioid painkillers beginning in the mid 1990s.
One of the touching stories that I think about and I like you to share is one of the ladies was addicted to opioids because she had a C-section, a cesarean section during her birthing of her baby, and ended up being addicted to Vicodin. And then she got wrapped up into this cartel, if you will, of being able to get her own supply, but being able to recognize that I can be part of this. I mean, this is a woman that probably never dreamed in her life she would ever be there. And there's something really, really scary about this. And I want you to comment on her and how the distribution pattern is being given, because in your book, this is the shock and awe moment. Fentanyl took a new direction in 2020 when we got locked down due to the pandemic. And we're now in 2023, but there were apps that became the way kids communicated in the gaming platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, opening a whole new marketplace to sell drugs. So now, like you said, you don't need light, you don't need plants, and you've already got people addicted to opiates. This is cheaper and faster to get to them. But now you've got our young people, and this is why we're talking about it today. Listen carefully to what he is about to say.
I think what has happened is all a function, again, of prevalent supply. In the drug trafficking world, the big issue you faced as a drug dealer, street dealer, a low-level dealer in your town was, where do I get my supply? Because frequently you would get your supply interrupted because your dealer or your connection would be arrested or would leave town or would decide get whatever the reason. And so it was always this concern. Where do I get my? Now what's happened is that concern does not exist. You can find many sources for whatever drug you are selling, principally fentanyl or methamphetamine, in your region. Pretty much in any region, you can find many people selling a lot of this stuff. Quantities that would have qualified them as kingpins 10, 15 years ago. Now many people are selling these quantities, and you see this all over the Midwest, the South. It's not relegated to one area. So what that means is now the big question is not where do I get my supply? It's where do I sell everything that I can get my hands on? And one of the answers to that, many answers, but one of the answers to that is, well, social media. I mean, where, particularly during COVID, you began to see this really explode. You began to see, people go, gee, we're in a time where everyone's locked down. The only connection the kids have is with their to the world is with their phone, their smart apps, and all that smart media apps, all that kind of stuff. And so Snapchat and Instagram and some of these others became places where anonymous dealers would set up, offering menus, very colorful menus. Some of them I've seen are just they look like almost like ice cream truck menus almost, and offering things that they call Percocet, they call Xanax, they call Vicodin, but they are not. They are just simply pills from Mexico that contain fentanyl, and that's all. They're counterfeit pills, and that because they're going for $2 a piece, $4 a piece. A real Vicodin would go for 30 or 50 or something like that. And so you saw this, but all of this is really a function of the enormous supply that is coming out of Mexico of these two drugs, and transforming, therefore, all manner in which these drugs are being sold. The other is, of course, now you're seeing these prescription pills coming out of Mexico that are counterfeit. They look like a Percocet, they look like a Xanax bar, they look like a Vicodin or an oxycodone generic 30 milligram, but all they contain is fentanyl. That is another innovation that grows from the fact that they have so much fentanyl, they're making so much fentanyl down there that they need new delivery mechanisms. So this counterfeit pill, which are now made by the tens of millions, I'm convinced, just amazing. The seizures are just through the roof. And so I'm convinced that at least tens of millions of these pills are coming through now. That's another way in which now you can sell the pills online too, and all this stuff. And but it's really the supply that has transformed how these drugs are sold and where, and pretty much all across the country, it seems now.
And when we started this conversation, you said people were reluctant to talk about it. But now when you went into The Least of Us, there's a Facebook site, and I'm sure it has grown astronomically since you wrote the book. And the Facebook site was about parents that lost their children. And at the time, it was 11,000. I'm going to repeat that. And I bet you if we went to that Facebook site, it is much bigger than today. These are young people getting fentanyl delivered to their house. Some of them are coming in the middle of the night to drop these pills off that the child has ordered. They have no idea that this could be the end of their life. And as a parent or a grandparent, you're not looking for this, so you never think about what it is. And that's where I think we need to start having these conversations of sadness and bringing together the community again, because you're right. 2020 was isolation, and you saw it just like Dreamland. When you isolate, you create a very sad and depressed moment. And you said it in The Least of Us. You said that we are creatures of community. That's how we flourish. And this is America. And we will not lay down and take this opioid epidemic, this fentanyl epidemic, this meth epidemic as one of the things that stops us. We have to create a community of understanding and commitment. So talk to me about where you see things as they are after having written The Least of Us. Has it been better, worse? Do you feel like you've picked up more people to understand the mission?
Oh, I think it's better and worse. It's very hard to say with this stuff. It's not one thing. It's either and, it's this and that, and I've felt that for a long time. But I would say that there's clearly far more awareness of this problem than there ever was when I was writing Dreamland. It's remarkable. I mean, there's now billions of dollars being dislodged from drug companies because of lawsuits that did not exist. When I was writing, there was only 3 lawsuits, as I said. It was just remarkable transformation. I've never imagined it, and I've watched it, sometimes with enormous awe. Like, wow, this is nothing like what I imagined. And at the same time, an awareness. When I was writing the Dreamland, nobody knew what an opioid was. I put opiate in the subtitle of my book. Now, of course, everybody knows. There's all kinds of things that are being funded that should have been funded long ago that are not, that now are, because people have kind of become aware of this problem. Of course, at the same time, we have enormous challenges and very scary reality on the street, and you can see it with the and in tent encampments, for example, methamphetamine and fentanyl are there, keeping people tied to the street, driving people out of their minds, killing people with scary regularity, and also no attempt by the two countries. Well, the two countries still have yet to find that place where they can collaborate effectively. I believe that place exists, just finding it, where they can collaborate effectively to do the kinds of things, like to staunch the supply coming in from Mexico, and also to staunch the supply of assault weapons that are bought so easily here, that are smuggled south, that then provide the weaponry through which those traffickers achieve the impunity that allows them to make these drugs and smuggle these drugs with so cavalierly in such scandalous, staggering, catastrophic quantities. It's a complicated story. I do see things that can be done. I think that binational collaboration is really at the top of that, has to be at the top of that list. It just is. There's just too many ways in which we both are involved in this as countries. And there's all kinds of problems with it. I lived in Mexico for 10 years. I know the issues. I know the obstacles and the hurdles and all that. They are many and they are high, but it just seems to me that there's more, that we've established a free trade agreement twice with Mexico. This should be top of the line priority for both countries, and certainly for our country, as should be the prevention of assault weapons going to the trafficking world down in, from here, bought here, going to the trafficking world down in Mexico. It's like we're arming the people who are killing us. Yeah. I don't see how that's a good idea.
I go back and I reflect on, this is a multi-headed monster. There's so many directions, and you cut one head off and another head grows. And like, one of the unfortunate pieces, if you cut out a fentanyl dealer and someone who has continuously fed a community and you get rid of him, unfortunately, you bring in others. And oftentimes, fentanyl is not, quote unquote, easy to make, and you do it wrong and you kill an entire population. I don't really know what some of the dark places that are out there are thinking. A drug dealer, to me, would want to keep their population alive, and if you're killing your consumer, that's just even more horrific. But one place I want to go to is, we know that the medical doctors were really, in my mind, conned into understanding that it wasn't a addictive substance. Now they're waking up and recognizing that what they have done in the past, and I know a conscience like no other, is I often think, as a healthcare provider, it is above all else do no harm. I can't imagine how many of these are feeling right now, knowing that they wrote those prescriptions and some of the people they either killed or they had a lifelong addiction now. The Foundation for Chiropractic Progress focused September on drug-free pain care awareness. It's a whole month. And we worked with the National Academy of Medicine with some wonderful collaborative partners on the opioid reduction task force, with acupuncturists and naturopaths and mental health providers. But I want to ask you this. There's a spot in the book that it was going to be required reading for medical doctors. Then there was like a, parentheses. Tell our readers what you learned when you tried to get your book as required reading for people who are using their pen and writing prescriptions. What did you learn?
Well, I think what you're referring to is Tufts University. I did not promote my book to Tufts University as required reading. I didn't even know about that. The Tufts University Medical School has received a lot of money from the Sackler family, charitable, philanthropic contributions, and that's great. And so as the book came out, this would have been in 2016, or I'd have to go back and look, but it was a few years back. A committee deciding what incoming freshmen, incoming first-year medical students, I should say, should read, was trying to decide whether they should read Dreamland. And there was a feeling that if they did that, that it would strain the relationship with the Sackler family and the medical school. And so they decided not to assign my book to the first year medical students. I'm not sure how many there are at Tufts University, of maybe 30 or 90 or whatever. I don't know what it is. I had nothing to do with that. I hadn't, the first I heard of it was an investigation into all that. And then I read the report, but it was a kind of a sign of how the Sackler family was important for, in terms of its generous philanthropy was really quite remarkable. And a lot of places didn't want to jeopardize that source.
Well, Sam, I got to tell you, while you're not responsible for it, I will sit here today and tell you this. This is required reading for every healthcare provider, because you're going to see something that you've never seen before, which is there is a deep heart in what's happening now, as you say, in the place of Dreamland. And that's where I want to go to now. I want to go to the optimistic opportunities. And I was really taken back. As we know, there's healthcare providers that are going to act and healthcare providers that are going to sit back and continue to do what they've always been doing for pain management. But there's something really special about what's happening and how it took place in the areas where people have this unwillingness to look at someone who has tattoos all over their face and think that it's safe even to be around them. Tell us a little bit about what you learned and how the downtown area quadrant really started to change, and what started to change it when you were writing The Least of Us.
Well, I think what's fascinating to me is how people are looking for some kind of response to this. And it's very daunting because, again, the drugs just don't stop coming. They're so potent. People die. You try to help them. And there, people on the street, there's no such thing as a long-term street fentanyl user. They all die. Either they get off the street, taken off the street, pushed off the street, whatever, or and get into treatment, or they die. And so looking around, I began to understand, starting with Dreamland, but then also into The Least of Us, the major, what I thought was really important idea to get across was that first of all, there is no one solution to all this. Number two, that we need to begin the repair of community, and that will provide then other solutions that right now don't seem possible, simply by bringing people together. And I think in Portsmouth's case, that's exactly what I discovered was happening in The Least of Us. It was becoming a town where not everybody, but more and more people were finding each other, sick of the drug addiction, sick of the deaths, sick of being the most obese county in the state of Ohio, sick of all these other things, hypertension, diabetes, smoking, et cetera, et cetera. And you begin to see these people coming after, kind of shell-shocked, to be sure, because they've been through 20, 30 years of just unrelieved, tragedy, but finding each other, using the abandoned real estate as places where they can now set up a CrossFit. And there are now 4 CrossFits in this town of Portsmouth, Ohio. That's where people come together to work out, to get into shape, to shed in recovery, get out of the dope stuff. There's all these new buildings that are being rehabbed frequently by recovering addicts who have been trained in job skills that they may at one point have had. They may have been an electrician 7 years ago and gone through 7 years of addiction. Now they're getting back into it. So they're repolishing their skills and this kind of thing. They are beginning to, or have already, revamped a lot of these old buildings. You are finding two, I think, crucial to all towns nowadays as a barometer of their economic and innovative robustness, is independent cafes. They got 2 independent cafes now, not the Starbucks by the interstate. Okay, we're talking locally owned independent cafes where people come together, meet by chance or on purpose, and that's where you get ideas cross-pollinating and fermenting, and you begin to see that. And it's really these cafes are the first place that people have actually had to meet one another on a sustained way since the Dreamland pool closed in 1993. So you find these little things, but it's all small stuff. It's all small stuff. It's small stuff. Nobody's coming in with a big factory, 150 jobs. That's not happening anymore. The attitude is nobody's coming. We got to do it ourselves. And that is the beautiful part of Portsmouth, Ohio. Portsmouth, Ohio has become a place of recovery, a place of solutions. And I would say that this is not just happening there. What I love is a lot of the stories that I've been able to find since then are just like Hazard, Kentucky. I was out in the small town of Hazard, Kentucky, which is in the middle of Appalachia, just a horrible opioid addiction story to tell. Coal mines leave, et cetera. It's just classic kind of Appalachian stuff. In downtown Hazard, Kentucky, there are now 42 new businesses. Wow. And these businesses employ a total of 142 people, meaning each business has 3 employees. Yeah. Let's just say something like that, right? It's not like the big factory coming to save us. It's just the local folks doing it. A good quarter of the owners of these businesses are in recovery from opioid addiction. Many of the employees are as well. And what's fascinating too, very much like Portsmouth, there is no outside source of money coming in. There's no tourism, no conventions, no freeway in which people get off and spend a bunch of money and leave. No, none of that is happening. It's all locally owned businesses supported by local folks. It is a beautiful story, and it gets to the very core of what I was trying to tell when the least of us, and telling with the story of Portsmouth, and then later on, as I discovered Hazard, I find it to be similar in the same thing. And there's other towns I'm looking into as well. That this is all created by small, microscopic sometimes efforts that are not deemed, you're not saving the world. You're doing small things, opening a small little shop, painting a curb, replanting a planter, coming together with other folks who want to repaint curbs and plant planters and that kind of thing. And you're finding each other amid the isolation of a town that has been, where the population has been devastated and half the people have left and all that kind of stuff. And so you're coming together in this way. It is the absolute example, in my opinion, these kinds of stories are the absolute examples of what needs to happen locally in so many, many places. It is the antidote. It is the defense, in my opinion, against a lot of these drugs. Not that these drugs don't exist in those towns. That's the misinterpretation completely. They do. It's just that there's now a new story to be told, and you're seeing people get energy from it and be together again in the same way that they always were, say, in Portsmouth with the swimming pool, bringing people together. They don't have that anymore. They got to find something else. And now it's this kind of internal municipal renovation, in a sense, and these new buildings going up, these new businesses starting, and then you're going to support those new businesses. And it's not money coming from outside. And again, nobody's coming. It's all about the small stuff, though, the non-sexy, the not noticed stuff. And to me, that is the breathtaking story that is growing out of a long saga that has to do with municipal decline, economic decline, Rust Belt, coal, opioids, now fentanyl and meth. It's seeing that take place, writing that narrative that begins in Dreamland and then carries over into the least of us, at least where Portsmouth is concerned. To me, that is really what is so exciting, because it's just people doing it on their own. Nobody's given them. There's no template. There's no bullet points or a think tank study. This is what you need to do to recover Hazard, Kentucky, or Portsmouth, Ohio. It's just simply building up what we always have needed, which is this feeling like we're in it together and we're moving together and not being discouraged when what you do doesn't save the entire world in some virtuous thing. And on the contrary, not caring about that, just keeping on moving forward, bringing in new energies, new people. Other people get into recovery. A lot of these places now have huge numbers of people in recovery from drug addiction. And when that happens, there's the other thing that's very, very important in all this. When you get a recovering addict, all of a sudden that person is a new human being. The brain is changed, right? And no longer the guy who's like sitting around, doped up, stealing the copper wire from the school district. It's somebody with energy, optimism, creativity, gratitude, really big gratitude, and all of a sudden that is a person who's going to contribute and not take away and not soak up all the energy, but add to the energy of a town moving forward. You get a lot of those folks involved, and there's a kind of a recovery scene, both municipally as well as individually. And you just find that is where you find that energy. And that's what's happening. See, that's the great thing, Sherry. Seems to me that's what's happening in a lot of these towns. It's not noticed because it's not sexy. And it doesn't save the world.
It is. It's so beautiful because if you could see this, and yes, we do have this podcast on YouTube, is like Sam is like a lotus flower. We started because he knows how deep this issue is, and Sam just lit up. Like, this flower is blooming, like his heart is in it and he is beaming. And it's so exciting when I see my podcast guests, because this is the heart of what makes Sam tick. And I'll tell you,
these are great American stories. These are great American stories of towns just not saying, oh, well, it was us, we might as well give up.
Yes. And I'm often reminded of someone that I wish I could meet, but I can't, is Mother Teresa. And her famous quote is, do small things with great love. And Sam, your book, The Least of Us, is exactly that. It's coming back together and bringing these small things out. And your courage to write both of these books, to bring people to the not so beautiful, the not so, like, how do you feel as a, let's just say you're a shop owner and the man comes up and he has tattoos all over his face, his hair's purple, and someone brought him in with love and kindness and showed him he was pushing people away because he was really broken inside. And what he needed was the town to grab his hand. He's one of the biggest advocates in your book. And when you read the book, and I'm telling you, read the book, because we're not even doing the remote justice because it's emotional. People will always forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And Sam is going to take you on a journey of feelings. And so, Sam, here's where we are. You noted something very, very powerful. Rock bottom today for drug addicts is death. You don't get second chances. You don't get third chances in some cases. It is a massive movement. And because of you, and I think you need to take the credit for it, because your book came out, people started talking and they started getting emboldened. And that whole David and Goliath thing, well, we have the money. The lawsuits are being settled and the money has to come back into the community. And what better way now? We know that there's no one way, because people have pain and they need it to be dealt with. And that's why the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress really wants to be able to be there for you for a drug-free approach when it's something like tendonitis that shouldn't be the first option ever to have an opiate given to you ever. And watch your dental perception of what pain looks like, because it is 30% of us that will be addicted on the first use. And I don't know if I'm that 30%. And it's very difficult to ascertain if your child or your loved one is going to be that 30%. But Sam is right. We need to get to the bottom of our communities and mobilize the movement, talk about prevention, talk about treatment prevention. And one of the pieces that I want you to touch on, Sam, before we close out today is there was in the CrossFit something that was very special to me, which was those that were recovering, they found spiritual guidance too. Is that there's not one place to get everything you need, but that people can come to that one place to get what they may need at that moment. Talk about how the churches had to reinvent themselves in this area as well.
Oh, I think that's a big part of what I tried to say, because I encountered these towns where the churches were at wit's end about what to do. And part of what they came to understand, I tell the story about Clarksburg, West Virginia, where this is also a very big deal. I mean, these were churches in decline. They no longer had any young people in their congregation. Their congregation shrunk to maybe 20 when it had been 300, many years ago. And so you're looking for churches, looking for a way to survive. And at the same time, not quite clear on what they needed to do when it comes to this very scary idea of these people wandering around schizophrenic symptoms of paranoia and delusions on meth or on fentanyl and all this stuff. And what came to a lot of them, I think, was a similar idea that you saw in Portsmouth and Hazard and so on. And that is that we need to be all about this together. And so they began to, I think what happened to the churches in Clarksburg, which really led, I think, to their rejuvenation to some degree anyway, is that they began to view the church as beyond the four walls. The four walls were important, and you need to keep the water going and the roof from leaking and so on. But if you viewed your church as ending there, that you would not belong. You would be closing your doors very soon. And I think what began to happen in this one town in Clarksburg, West Virginia, was that the churches understood that by helping these folks, in the one case I write about, they're helping them through a particularly vicious winter and providing warming shelters during these very, very brutal temperatures. But they came to understand that, that's what Jesus would do. We can assume, and that the church through that then gains its own rejuvenation by viewing the church as well beyond the four walls, and understanding once you sit down with the guy who's got all these tattoos all over him, you talk with them, and okay, he's not a bad guy. You just kind of come to understand he's not this terrifying force that you imagined that he was when you just saw him on the street, homeless and muttering to himself. To me, this was also a part of this, because so many churches, so many areas badly affected by this problem have been heavily churched, and frequently the churches don't quite know what to do, or even don't want to know what to do. But I think that they have a crucial role in finding out a role for themselves. And in this town, it was kind of, they took a certain amount of energy from helping these folks during these very, very brutal winters. This was in 2019. And I just found that to be also just, exciting and illuminating, and not a Christian, but I wrote a lot about the role of churches in this area. Pardon me. I wrote a lot about churches on this issue, because I felt that that's where frequently in many towns in the country, that's where you find community, and that's where you find the churches losing people, because they, perhaps some of them anyway, because they have not viewed the church as going far beyond the four walls.
I love how you open up to what you are, but what can be. And you said you're not a Christian, yet here you are finding the spiritual essence of all these communities coming together. You're not a coffee drinker, yet you're hanging out in these coffee shops. So how much do I love what you do? You are the epitome of what makes this country great. And I want to end on that level is, Sam, the money's coming back to the communities when we start to settle these lawsuits. Healthcare providers, listen closely. Sam has a recipe. When you read The Least of Us, your heart will tell you what to do. But Sam, I want you to close out with a few final words on where we need to go in 2023, and then tell us what you're going to be up to next.
I think that that if this money is a one-time amount of money, billions of dollars, we're not going to get this back. Okay, it's not a recurring revenue source. If we, as counties and towns all across this country, came out of this having spent that money, and we have a continuum of care for addiction that involves the community, involves the churches, involves local businesses hiring people, involves people maybe removing tattoos, starts in jail. Drug court's part of it, where you can go to court, and a judge oversees you going to meetings and urine tests and all that kind of stuff on the outside. It starts in jail, extends on the outside, all kinds of ways of providing a continuum of care. Very, very important idea. A continuum of care for addiction that begins in jail, but then continues on the outside. If we have that in counties all across this country, towns all across this country, or at least the very beginnings of that, the beginnings of building that out, we would be a much healthier and a country, one more able to solve these knotty, difficult problems that we say. Remember, when you do provide a continuum of care, what I've found anyway seems to happen is that people come out of the woodwork too. They want to volunteer. They want to help. Churches and so on, all these different groups, people, just normal citizens, PTAs, whatever, they want to help, but it's hard when you don't see any attempt or any approach that looks like it's going to work, and you just kind of are negative and down and depressed about it. But when you start having some of these ideas, a rethought jail, so people begin their recovery in jail, it's a powerful, powerful idea. But then all that continues on the outside. You get that energy that's now lying dormant of people who want to help, but they don't know how. So okay, forget it. I'm not going to do anything. They can see that actually it means something. And then people they know start doing it. And then pretty soon, a lot more people, that energy of the community is leverage, where now it's just lying dormant. And I think that is a powerful, powerful idea. People in the medical professions, chiropractors, et cetera, you got to be somehow part of all of this. This is such an important role for you, and your town will benefit. If your town benefits, you will benefit. But it's about restoring and rebuilding community in small ways. Do not think there's a big magic answer that's coming around the pike. I don't see it, but I do see the powerful effects of local, small scale rebuilding of the economy, of small businesses, of addiction services, et cetera, all of that's so important. So keep in mind that you have a role to play. We all do, churches too, et cetera, in all this, and it's a very important one.
Okay, we're going to wrap this up with what's next for you, Sam. I know you're on the cutting edge of something. I just don't know what it is. So you can release as much as you want, because you're the man behind the bullets.
Here's the weird thing. Okay, I'm going to tell you this. I did not get into this to become, Mr. Dope. Right. Okay. Right. So I became a journalist because I wanted to, everything fascinates me. I want to write about all kinds of stuff. So I spent 12 years now writing about this. I think it's kind of time for me to do something else. I want to do something very different. So, and it turns out that it's not that different after all. The idea being that I may, and I underline may, I'm not sure what I'm doing, if I'm going to do this, but I would like to prod it and probe it and see if it's possible, is to write a book. Strangely, I know this is going to sound totally weird, about the subculture of the tuba in the United States.
Interesting.
Okay. Do you know that this weird fact that there are only two, all the years and centuries of human innovation, musical instruments, there's only two perfect tubas in the world. They were owned by the Chicago Symphony, and there's been many, many attempts to recreate them, et cetera. So, but the point is the tuba world is a fascinating world. It's bizarre because I don't play the tuba. I don't really ever thought about playing the tuba, but it's a fascinating world for a couple of reasons. But one of them is connected to what we've just been talking about. I've just spent 12 years writing about addiction. That means people obsessed with their own destruction, essentially, or pursuing aggressively their own destruction, believing they can find happiness from buying a substance and from an outside substance, isolated, not without any real discipline or hard work in their lives. If you think about it, the polar opposite of addiction is playing the tuba. The tuba is something that you play not because you're going to get wealthy, but because it fulfills something within you. You're not getting this from outside. You play with other people. It's highly collaborative, right? It's all about postponing gratification, which addiction is, of course, the opposite of. It's all about hard work and discipline and understanding that you will never get rich, but you may find some enormous fulfillment. And I find that for most tuba players, and it's so people always ask me, how do we keep kids from getting addicted? And I have not had very good answers to that, because I'm not sure I know that there's very good answer to that. But I would say now find your tuba.
Oh, I love
Find
it.
that
Sam.
thing that you are consumed with, that involves you expanding your capacities and using your capacities instead of some substance that you buy, a consumer product that you buy to make you happy. We know that doesn't make us happy, and heroin and fentanyl are about the epitome of that. So all of that is simply to say that I am really battling with this idea that maybe a place to write about that actually isn't all that far away from what I've been writing about is the tuba, and the subculture of the people who play tuba is fascinating. There's all kinds of fascinating stories within that, of course, but I don't have time to explain it all. But there's just this, I think, this fascinating idea, like we have gotten away from the very qualities in this country that make a great tuba player, and the symptom of that is addiction.
Sam, what you just said delighted me beyond belief, and I rarely give my guest homework. But Sam, there is an Adjusted Reality podcast with Chris Niebauer. He's a psychologist, fabulous individual, and he talks about the left and right brain, and the right brain is that deep inner tuba player. So I need you to listen to that episode, because we're going to watch you, Sam. You're full of greatness. You're an inspiration to so many, but let's get that right brain firing off. And once you listen to the podcast and once you're done that book, I want to have you back here.
Oh, happy to do it.
I want my guests to know that creativity is the essence of happiness. It's the experience. It's not the product. Happiness is about building out. So Sam, I cannot thank you enough. I know we're going to have you back. That's number one. Number two, please read Dreamland and The Least of Us. And we're going to follow Sam on his adventures through tuba. So thank you so much, Sam.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Sherry. It's been great. It's been wonderful to talk to you. Thank you so much for your interest.
I want to thank you for tuning into Adjusted Reality as we spoke to Sam Quinones about the opioid epidemic, meth, and fentanyl that are coming into communities that are right where you live. This is a problem, but remember what Sam said. Small but wonderful ways we can change this drug addiction around. First, it's prevention. Then it's helping those that are addicted find their way back into society with love, with confidence, with dignity. That many are going to be also going through withdrawal. And unfortunately, with withdrawal, they're going to need physical help. Chiropractic can assist oftentimes with what actually brought a person to take a drug in the first place. Often it's musculoskeletal pain. And yes, chiropractors need to work with their community as well. The doctors, the churches, the small businesses, building a support to build back lives that have been broken through the use of these drugs. This podcast was brought to you by the Foundation for Chiropractic Progress, and we want you to know we support you in any way. We know many lives have been touched by addiction, mental health issues, and we want you to know that we support you. We want to give you a gift today for listening at f4cp.org/health. One that gives you the gift to start looking at other options for your mind, body, and spirit. It's an ebook which focuses on many ways you can optimize health and ones that need the most care. So share this podcast. Share the information that you get, because sharing is in fact caring, and that's exactly what Sam spent his last 10 years doing. Now, don't forget to subscribe, share this podcast with friends and family, rate and review. We need you. If you're feeling inspired to learn more about chiropractic or to find a chiropractor near you, visit f4cp.org/findadoctor. We appreciate your support, and we look forward to you checking in again soon. Remember Sam, he's going on a mission for the tuba, and you're going to want to watch that next. So look forward to having you back, and thank you for joining me today.